Hey, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Rising Tide Leadership Podcast, Identity and Influence. I'm sitting here with the one and only Dr. Lem Usita. Dr. Lem, what is up?
Yes, sir. Dr. Mo, good seeing you. Always great to spend time with you and talk about these leadership lessons.
Yeah, I love having leadership conversations. Today,
Yeah, man.
we are talking about leadership lesson number 36, leadership and anticipating. Tell us real quick, what should we be in store for before I get to my
Yeah.
questions?
When I was writing these lessons, and going through, going through these lessons, like Steve Jobs was still kind of a big deal. So that tells you how long ago this lesson was written. But he had the ability to anticipate what people wanted. Like he changed industries, he changed the way we did computing, he changed the way that we communicated. Like he led and had a vision for things. But I think he did that well because he understood where he was starting from. He understood what his current reality was, and he did a great job of moving industry and the way that we compute and communicate into the futures.
I really enjoyed his autobiography. He becomes very introspective as he gets older, and he was very focused. And
Mm-hmm.
the first question I had for you today, I know we're using Steve Jobs as the case study for this specific leadership lesson. How would you define the ability to anticipate in leadership?
So anticipation to me is connected to having vision, and it's having the vision to think about the impact that your leadership can have in the future. And it seems intuitive and it seems so simple, but I've seen enough leaders lead without thought about their actions in the future. I've seen enough leaders not anticipate what their leadership practice moves them toward. It's a simple concept, but here we are. We're talking about this idea because leading and anticipating doesn't necessarily always go together. So that's part of the reason why I wrote this lesson.
Why is anticipation so crucial as a skill for leaders in any industry?
So if you're going to lead has to do with challenging the status quo. It has to do with innovation and change. At the end of the day, again, it's tied to vision. So do you have a clear and compelling vision to lead people to? Can you anticipate the impact of your actions? I think it helps you with vision. And so if you're not headed anywhere, then you're not leading. And like I said, I've seen enough leaders lead and not move to the future and to not anticipate what's happening in the future. And sadly, like, again, we have to talk about this because it's a part of leadership.
Let's jump into the Steve Jobs case study.
Sure.
Steve Jobs was known for anticipating what people wanted before
Mhm.
they even knew it. What leadership qualities enabled Steve Jobs to do this effectively?
So if you look up his leadership style, there's a lot written about him. Like you mentioned, his autobiography. A lot of people describe him as an autocrat. He led every area and made all the decisions. He had high expectations and he handled all of the details. I think it's a nice way of saying that he was a micromanager, but he also led. And so that's why I think autocrat more than micromanager, because he was actually moving to change and had a vision for what his company and what the world could be.
He is so fascinating. When do you think he started learning how to anticipate those things?
Yeah, so I would say that he had there's a couple of things that worked for him. He still had he was fired from Apple and then he came back. When he came back, it was still a $3 billion company. So he had a good base, right? And so, but they had kind of lost their way. They had like 15 or so offerings. And what he did was he simplified Apple and just focused in on these four products. And so I think he had a lot of things going for him. He had a good base. He had something to work with. And then he came in at a particular season to do a particular job, right? To move Apple away from bankruptcy and make it profitable. And he 100x the company like in no time, you know what I mean? But in order to do that, he needed to have focus, and it didn't matter what the industry or what other people were saying. He didn't listen to any of that. He just focused in on this is what we're going to do to innovate. We're going to make these machines and all of these products classy, and we're going to change the way that people do things, and we're gonna create this community and make people want these things. Like he did so many amazing things, and he was able to see it even though he got criticized and nobody else saw it.
It seems for Steve Jobs, this was innate, if I am reading it correctly and what I've
Mhm.
read about him and know about him. What about other leaders? Can other leaders develop the skill?
Man, I don't know. I Maybe when you take a look at his psychology, when you take a look at some of the things that he dealt with and some of the descriptions of him, like people describe him as a megalomaniac. They described him as, sometimes brutally honest, which comes across as mean. You know what I mean? And like he would just call people out on things. I think he had some things in his personality and his upbringing and his experience that made him kind of ruthless. And that's the thing. Like he was ruthless, right? Almost to a fault, but like obviously he made some changes. And so like, can you develop this? I don't know that all leaders have the stomach for that, for that level of honesty. I think you can develop some of it, to your level, but like he just was kind of, well, a megalomaniac is way out there. And so like if you have that psychology to do that, then you can, make that happen.
So it's really hard to balance vision and practicality.
Mhm.
How can leaders balance their own long-term vision with the current realities that they face on either their team and or in their industry?
So when I think through vision and practicality, I don't know that it's a balance necessarily. You need to know where your organization's current reality is in order to move them to their preferred future. So I guess the balance is you need to know both, right? And if you don't have a good, solid starting, this is where I'm at, this is our current reality, then it's hard to know, what steps you need to take in order to bring them to the preferred future. So I guess the balance is you need to know both.
When does the pursuit of vision become a risk rather than an advantage?
Tied back to what we just said, it becomes a risk if you don't understand your current reality. Sometimes also when you aren't given all the information and you aren't given all the responsibility to lead, that can also be a risk. But when you're pursuing a vision and you're not clear on your current reality, then it's hard to know how to move because you haven't done the work to figure out where you are. So I think the risk of pursuing a vision without knowing your current reality is I mean, I've seen leaders do that. I'm gonna lead you to this vision, but they haven't taken the time to figure out the current reality. So they can't bring people along because, people are in the current reality. And so yeah, I think those two things are tied together.
Let's talk about decision making and anticipation. Steve Jobs made controversial decisions. You mentioned that a little
Mhm.
bit earlier on. For instance, he refused to support Adobe Flash.
Mhm.
So, how does the leader know when to stick to their vision despite the criticism?
Right. Like there was a time when everybody was using Flash, right? And that was a big criticism. I remember like, yeah, he's getting rid of Flash. And like nobody uses Flash anymore. You know what I mean? He made a ton of controversial decisions. One of the things that he did was he borrowed a ton of money from Microsoft in order to keep Apple afloat. And that was a very controversial decision. Why are you borrowing money from the competitor? But he did that and it helped keep him afloat and Apple was able to move forward. He also simplified, like I said earlier, Apple's offerings from 4 products instead of the 15 or so. Like they had so many products that they didn't even know, what they were doing. And so when he simplified things, it made everything, like he was able to streamline everything. And again, because of all this, he changed the way that we could, he changed computing, he changed communication, and then he developed this community. He created Apple fanboys, right? These people that just love Apple products.
Yeah.
And he stuck to his vision, but I think he was able to stick to his vision because he had a great understanding of where his current reality was. He had a good base to start with. Like I said, it was still a $3 billion company when he came back and they were on the verge of bankruptcy. And so I just think he just did some really, really smart things to anticipate this is where we're at. We need to simplify things in order to get to where we need to get going. And so having a good understanding, having a good base helps. Having a good understanding of your current reality helps. and then a clear and compelling vision to move to like, this is what we're going to do. And then all the criticism can come. And he didn't really care about any of that. Like he just kept moving forward. And now we look back on it and we're like, man, he was right.
Have you seen examples of leaders who failed because they didn't anticipate change? And what can we learn from their mistakes?
So when I was thinking through that, like I would say, like, let's use examples of companies that failed because they didn't anticipate change. And there's so many of them. Like Blockbuster is like the first one that comes to mind. They were making so much money renting videos. And then the ecosystem changed. The technology allowed for us to stream. And now Blockbuster doesn't appear. Like they're not around. Kodak didn't make the change from analog to digital. Borders. Like I was looking up Borders. You remember Borders? They were everywhere, man. That's where I went to go
Do
get books. No more Borders, no more Tower Records, no more Polaroid, no more Toys R Us. Like Amazon changed all of that. And so like there are so many examples of people that didn't anticipate change and didn't like pivot to like what was coming up. And I think the latest thing, I think today that we need to pivot to is AI. There's a lot of conversation around like AI and there's a lot of fear around AI. Like it's the same thing with like the next thing. You know what I mean? And there are a lot of people that are afraid to get on board because this is the way we've always done it. And so like if you don't anticipate those change, if you don't anticipate those changes, then you're gonna cease to be as an organization.
what practical steps can leaders take to develop their ability to anticipate future trends?
Well, something that we keep talking about is you make small moves. And so how you figure out what your small moves are is you take a look at your journal, to take a look at your reflection and evaluation of your leadership practice. And here's the deal. If you don't have a journal, then that's where you start. Like that's the first step for you, right? That's a practical first step. Get a journal, start reflecting and evaluating your leadership practice. And then like when you write stuff down, then you can kind of see like, again, to the principle, know your current reality in order to get to your preferred future. If you don't know, if you're not clear on your current reality is, then it's hard to get from this point to your preferred future because you don't even know where you're starting. So the practical step is get a journal, start reflecting and evaluating your leadership practice, and then go from there. Do something small first in order to move into the future.
How does a leader cultivate an environment where their team can anticipate and adapt to change?
So, as the leadership lesson suggests, there are some environments where an autocrat or a single leader making all the decisions work. In some cases, the single leader discipline of leading an organization works. Some of those environments have that lend itself to an autocrat or a single leader is startups. Because startups need to be nimble and move quickly, right? And when you have a single leader, like you can make decisions fast. And then I think organizations that are struggling, like in Steve Jobs' case, like Apple was about to be bankrupt. And so he came in and he just, as a single leader, made all the decisions and, moved the company forward. So a leader can cultivate an environment where the team can anticipate and adapt to change, depending on where the organization is, right? And so I think organizations grow, and as they grow, it necessitates that need to adapt and change, like the AI example. Like there's a lot of companies that are trying to keep up with AI and there's a lot of fear around, well, I'm going to lose my job. And I'm like, maybe you can lose your job if you're letting fear drive you, or you anticipate the change, learn how to use AI to make yourself better, and then keep moving forward.
Well, let's talk about some final takeaways. What's one key mindset shift that leaders should embrace to better anticipate the future?
I think one of the changes that you need to make is to think about anticipating in leadership. Like we said at the front end, like anticipating and anticipation isn't necessarily something that we practice much these days or experience much these days because we live in an instant gratification kind of culture. And so to develop anticipation and anticipating is actually a skill that like really isn't practiced much these days. So I guess there needs to be that mind shift change to think about anticipating. And then the thing that we've been kind of talking about through this whole episode is anticipating the future requires clarity in the present. And when you know your current reality, you can usher people into their preferred future.
The last question, what are the recommended books, articles, exercises that can help leaders develop this skill?
So I just want to focus on one book by this guy, these two guys, Katzenbach and Smith, and the book is The Discipline of Teams. I don't know if you've read this book, but basically they work through, so the discipline of teams, they basically work through, there's two ways to make decisions as a team: single leader discipline, team discipline. And so in Steve Jobs' case, he was the single leader that made all the decisions. So he just used single leader discipline all the time. The team discipline of leadership is when you involve a team to make decisions. Now, when I was executive director at a nonprofit, I took a look at all the decisions, and sometimes I used a single leader discipline to make decisions, and sometimes I involved the team discipline in order to make decisions. And at the end of the day, it was always the leader's responsibility. It was always my responsibility at the end of the day. But then I had the ability to choose whether it was going to be the single leader that made this decision, or I'm going to use the team discipline to make that decision. So the Discipline Teams by Katzenbach and Smith, I think really kind of gives insight into this autocratic type of leadership, and then what it looks like to develop and cultivate a team discipline of leadership. I've been in some situations where the team gets empowered to make decisions that the single leader needs to make, and that always makes the process longer and then never ends well. There are just some decisions that the leader needs to make, and then there are many decisions that we can involve the team in. But like knowing which discipline of leadership to use is really key.
It's tough. You can't just decide to be intuitive. You have to live the journey. You have to journal. You have to talk with people who have done it before. And
you develop your intuition, you develop anticipating, and you can't really develop unless you're writing it down and reflecting and evaluating and putting it in your journal. So get that journal.
For my audience, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Sign up for the newsletter. It's free. Until next time, Dr. Lem, I'll see you later, brother.
Peace.
Thanks a lot, man. All right.